Rocker in running shoes is something I spend a ton of time talking about on this channel, and while this may come as a surprise to some of you, I'm not totally against it. In fact, I like some rocker in a running shoe for very specific types of shoes and types of running. I just don't want it in every single shoe. So what I thought I'd do is sit down and define the two types of rocker that are out there, early stage and late stage, define some terms like what do we mean by aggressive geometry, and talk about why one rocker may suit you better than the other. And before I jump in, I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer that this is a very complicated and very nuanced subject. There's a lot that goes into this besides just the geometry of the midsole of a running shoe. You've got the technology, you've got the foams, you've got the stiffness of it. Is there a plate or isn't there a plate? How does the shoe fit? There's a ton of different variables that all together build into this. But one of the ones that is most noticeable is the actual rocker or geometry of the midsole. So that's what I'm really going to be focusing on here and talking about broad concepts that are really just starting points to really dive into this stuff very deeply. And the place to start, believe it or not, is how do you actually walk? How does the foot engage the ground when we're walking? Well, walking is actually a heel-to-toe movement. When we walk, we land on the heel, the foot flattens out, you get dorsal flexion in the MTP joints, or essentially the knuckles of your foot bend, your toes bend up, you push off the toe and the foot lifts, and then that's repeated over and over and over. And that's a very natural walking stride for really anyone. Now, some runners, depending on what study you see, the majority of runners are also heel strikers. So it's a very similar motion. Land on the heel, the foot flattens out, the MTP joints flex, you get dorsal flexion, and then you push off the toe. It's the same for midfoot and forefoot striking. You're just not engaging the heel in the same way. Midfoot strikers are landing flatter, and forefoot strikers are landing up on the forefoot of their foot, sometimes all the way up on their toe for like a sprinter, for example. So it's a similar motion. It's whether or not you're getting the full range of motion or you're getting a subset of the motion from midfoot or just forefoot only. And this is important because as soon as we put a shoe or a sandal on the foot, now we're putting a midsole under the foot. That's between the foot and the ground. And if the midsole is very squared off, very rectangular, as you can see here, very similar to what you would have in a flip-flop or a shower thong or something like that. You know, this standard budget one that you get at the gas station or you get in a hotel or you get at the gym because you need them. It's just that super flat piece of foam that's under your foot. That feels kind of awkward when you're actually walking in it, because as soon as you start to move your foot and do that toe off, you flex the MTP joint to get that dorsal flexion in the toe, the midsole or that flip-flop basically just stays in place, and that becomes very awkward to actually walk in. You'll catch your toes, it makes that big flapping sound. It's just very strange and awkward overall. Now, I don't have any flip-flops here. I actually don't own any flip-flops, but I have something close, and that's a Luna sandal. This is pretty much the same concept. This is a pair of Luna sandals that are brand new. I've never had these on my foot. I've never tried them on, and you can see that the midsole, this piece of foam that I'm actually walking or running on, is dead flat. It is not contoured to my foot. It's completely flat underfoot, and the first, I don't know, 15, 20, even 30K of walking and running in these to break them in is really not that fun. Now, once they do break in, they start to look more like this. You can see this is a pair of the same sandal that I have over 500 kilometers in, and this is really molded to my foot, not only in the shape, but now you see a pronounced curve in this. You can see that this shoe is now taking the shape of a rocker. If I go to the medial side, you can see that even more. You can see that not only have I worn the foam where I'm actually getting that kind of smooth transition off the toe, but you're seeing in the heel, it's actually starting to wrap around my toe. Any sandal, and frankly any shoe, will do this. The more you wear it, the more you break it in, the more it sort of molds to your foot, and you'll get that sort of curve in the shoe. And that curve is what I'm talking about as rocker. When you take a very basic piece of footwear like a flip-flop and you wear it for any length of time, it begins to mold to your foot and you actually get that pronounced curve in it. And that curve really is rocker. That's what we're talking about, that heel to toe rocker that makes the transition in that piece of footwear smoother. Now, if we go to a modern running shoe, and again, this is a very simple illustration of the same concept, and you take a deeper midsole, a thicker midsole, which any running shoe that we're running in now in 2025 is going to have a considerably higher midsole, much more foam between your foot and the ground than even in the past couple of years. You can take the same idea and exaggerate it. So if we take that rectangular flip-flop, that block of foam, and now we make it truly a block, it's double the thickness, sometimes more, this is what you get. So if you're going to flex off the NTP joints, get the dorsal flexion in the toes, again, now you've got this very awkward piece of foam that's under you, even more awkward than the flip-flop because now it's double the thickness. It's going to be even more floppy under your foot. Now, obviously, this is an oversimplistic example, but as soon as you take that foam and you make it thicker under your foot, the thicker or the higher stack that you make the shoe, the harder it is to actually toe off because there's now more material that not only do you need to flex, but you need to get up off the toe. You need to be able to leverage it off the toe. Again, think about that basic brand new pair of flip-flops. It's very awkward to run in. Now double or triple that as far as stack height. That's what we're generally running in now in 2025 in running shoes. Now imagine trying to actually toe off that with that big block of squared off foam under the forefoot. It's not going to be very fun, is it? So if we go back to our very thick block of foam under your foot, between your foot and the ground, the solution that modern running shoes will have is to actually begin to cut away that material in the forefoot and the heel to make that transition smoother, to make it easier to actually do that natural heel to toe or midfoot or forefoot off movement. Let's bring a few concepts together now. So if we have that rounded off forefoot and heel of the block of foam under your foot, now we introduce what's called drop or offset. That's what we often refer to as a 6 or 8 or 10 mil drop in the heel to toe drop. We begin to get the primitives of the geometry of a running shoe. Now, if we begin to look at this as far as what we're referencing, here's what we get. We have the forefoot rocker point and the heel bevel or the heel rocker in the shoe. Talking about the forefoot, depending on where that rocker point is, where the curve of the forefoot actually starts, whether it's about the 60% mark or about the 80% mark, sometimes it's a little bit more forward or sometimes a little bit further back. But that's really what we're referencing as the forefoot rocker point in the shoe. And I'll get back to the point in a second. In the heel bevel, you're also getting a very less extreme to more extreme heel bevel. Again, that's going to smooth the transition, especially for heel striking or walking in a shoe. And again, oversimplifying a lot of concepts here, but this is essentially the basic of what we're talking about with forefoot rocker points and heel bevel or heel rocker. There is one other concept that factors into this, and that's toe spring. Now, this is something that we were seeing brands play a lot with over the past couple of years, but lately we're seeing less and less because the problem with toe spring, as you can see here, is that it is essentially preloading the toes. Now, this is doing something called loading the windlass mechanism of the foot. It's stiffening the arch of the foot, giving you a firmer, stiffer platform to actually leverage off of when you're running through your stride. Now, this is great for really fast running, sprinting, middle distance running, basically track running. This is a lot what track spikes, modern super spikes will actually do to the foot. But it's not the most comfortable for longer distances. And if you're a runner who has limited toe mobility, preloading the toes by basically flexing them up may be something that you can't really do because you don't have that flexor. It's just not comfortable. As I said, toe spring is something we're seeing less and less of in 2025 in super shoes because I think there's other ways that brands are engineering geometry to provide some of the same benefits. I think a good example of this would be Puma's Fast R3, that cantilever plate in front of the toe, is trying to get at a similar feel. Different solution, but similar feel to get more leverage off the toe. And that's essentially what toe spring is meant to do. So if we take the toe spring out, we just go back to the drop and the geometry of the midsole of the shoe, where that forefoot rocker point is. This is an example of an early stage rocker shoe. The rocker point is pushed back towards the midfoot of the shoe, generally around the 70 to 60% mark, sometimes a little bit further back in the shoe. On the other side of that, we have what's called a late stage rocker, which is where the forefoot rocker point is pushed forward, closer to the toes. Generally around the over 75-80% mark of the shoe. Now, the illustrations that I'm using here are very extreme. I'm trying to really illustrate the example. They're not usually this clunky, But these are the two primary types of forefoot rocker that we're generally talking about with running shoes. Here are a few examples of early stage forefoot rocker shoes. Shoes like the Adidas Evo 1, the Nike Vaporfly 4, the Asics Metaspeed Edge Tokyo, and the Puma Fast R3 are all good examples of this type of geometry. Really what that is remember, the rocker point is closer to the midfoot, so it's pushed back behind the MTP joints, or really the ball of the foot. The rocker is gradual. There's a gradual curve that's moving from that midfoot into off the toes. And generally speaking, these shoes will have a stiffer midfoot to heel to give some stability there as you roll forward and engage the forefoot rocker. And overall, from a ride profile, this gives you a smooth roll off the toe. Now, these generally are what I call a low play configuration shoe. If you don't know what I'm talking about, link in the description to a video that breaks those down using the Asics Metaspeed series as two examples of that. But these are shoes that have the plate low to the ground in the forefoot. So that's also giving you a more stable ride in the forefoot of the shoe, and that's what's providing that smooth roll off the toe. Now, some runners will find these shoes a little bit too hard to handle. They're a little bit too aggressive. It just feels like you're rolling forward all the time. Or because of that low play configuration, that can feel a little bit too harsh, a little bit too rigid for some types of runners. But for most people, these are going to be that smoother roll off the toe feel of shoes. And the other side of this would be the late stage forefoot rocker. Shoes like the Nike Alphafly 3, the Saucony Endorphin Elite 2, the Asics Metaspeed Sky Tokyo, and the Adidas Evo 2 are good examples of this type of geometry. The rocker point is closer to the toes, and there's a range here of where that rocker point is between these four shoes, but that gives often a very pronounced rocker curve and also a stiffer forefoot in that shoe, because the way these shoes work is they engage in this very falling forward feel, and generally they're using softer foams or more resilient foams or other technology, like in the case of the Nike Alphafly, to give you that bouncy feel off of the toe. So whereas early stage forefoot rocker shoes give you a smooth roll off the toe, late stage rocker shoes generally give you a falling forward feel, but also a lot of bounce to compensate for that. These generally will feel more dynamic to some runners unless you really like that smoother feel off the toe of the early stage rocker forefoot. I am very purposely referencing these rocker profiles in super shoes specifically because I think that's where rocker really is best used. A super shoe is a shoe that's really meant to improve your running efficiency, and you want every sort of technical and material advantage that you can get to really improve that efficiency, to make you be able to run whatever pace you want to run at for a longer distance. That's really the promise of a super shoe. It's not necessarily making you faster, it's making you faster for longer. And a big part of that is the rocker profile in the shoe. And when it comes down to it, there really isn't a right or wrong. It really comes down to feel. Which one of these types of feels do you actually prefer? Now, there are a couple shoes out there that sort of bridge the gap between these two profiles of rockers. Mainly the Adidas Adios Pro lineup. Currently the Adios Pro 4, but the Adios Pro 3 did the exact same thing, just in a slightly different way previous to the current model. The Adios Pro 4 is a shoe that technically has a late stage rocker. The rocker point is moved more towards the toe. However, because of the bounciness of the foam in that shoe and the rods that Adidas uses, which isn't a plate, there's more flex in that shoe, it gives you a smoother roll off the toe. So it's blending the two types. The Adios Pro 3 before that did the same thing. It would roll you more, but depending on how you landed on it, you could have a more bouncy experience because of the foam in that shoe. Again, the Adidas Adios Pro is a shoe that sort of bridges the gap between these two profiles, but generally super shoes are going to fall into one of these two camps. Now, obviously, we're not all running 100% of the time in super shoes, and if you are, you really should reconsider some choices you've made and really start to look at trainers, because a good trainer is just as important as a good race shoe or super shoe. And the amount of rocker in a trainer is quite important depending on what you really want that trainer to do. Taking a handful of trainers that I've reviewed on this channel and putting them on this scale from less to more, this is what we get. Shoes like the Atreyu Daily Trainer 2, the Nike Pegasus 41, and the Adidas Supernova Rise 2, I think are good examples of less forefoot rocker, giving you a more relaxed ride In my mind, it's a shoe that's more versatile. You can do a lot more in it. Where shoes like the Adidas Evo SL, the Adidas Boston 13, and getting into the New Balance Rebel V5 are shoes that are much more aggressive. They have much more aggressive geometry. And again, foams and other materials in those shoes. But those are shoes that are better for performance running, faster running, tempo running. And something like the Nike Vomero 18, I think blends between the two. It's a shoe that does have some rocker in it, but it's mild. It's a shoe that you can do relaxed running in quite well. But if you do need to pick it up a little bit, you can. It's a shoe that will just roll you forward in a very nice way. And if we take race flats or training flats in this example, and we put them on here, two best examples that I've talked a lot about this year are the Adidas Adios 9 and the Nike Streakfly 2. And as you can see, these are on opposite ends of the spectrum. The Adidas Adios 9 is a shoe that has a very traditional geometry, very little rocker in that shoe, and what rocker is in that shoe flattens out because it is so soft and flexible on foot. It really fits like a slipper. That's a shoe that you can do fast running. You can do just as fast work in it as you can in the Streakfly 2, but it's just more relaxed. It's a shoe that you can use for a lot of other things. Easy running, hill reps, hill sprints, do a full workout in. It's a shoe that just has a lot more range. Whereas the Streakfly 2, given how aggressive that shoe is from a geometry, plate configuration, that shoe also has a large amount of toe spring in it, like any kind of super spike would. That's a shoe that really you're going to reserve just for really racing or really key reps in a workout. It's not a shoe you're ever going to be doing casual running in. It's just way, way too aggressive. So the bottom line here is rocker is good when you're trying to maximize running efficiency. As I talked about, in a super shoe where you're really trying to get all of those gains you possibly can from all the tech in the shoe, that's when you want a lot of rocker. If you have limited flexibility in MTP joints, and you need help of the rocker to actually help you toe off because you don't have a lot of flex in your toes to actually leverage off, that's where rocker is actually quite good. Now that's a whole other complicated subject, but generalizing it, generally people with stiffer toes are going to prefer a little bit more rocker in their shoe. And if you're a runner who wants your shoes to help you out more, not necessarily to do the work for you, but to help you move forward more, you're going to like a lot more rocker. Rocker is not so good when you're looking to build strong running mechanics. You really want the shoe to kind of move and get out of the way. You want to be able to feel the ground and really feel how your foot is working against the ground. So when you're prioritizing foot and leg strength, that's when rocker isn't so good because again, you want to be able to feel the entire transition of the energy transfer through each strike. So when you want to be in control of your shoes fully, you don't want the shoe helping you out. You don't want the shoe dictating how you're going to be running. You want to be actually in control of that. So you're building mechanics, prioritizing foot and leg strength, and you want to be fully in control of your shoes and dictate how you will run in them. That's when rocker isn't always so good. As I said in the upfront, I have oversimplified so much in this video, but I wanted to make the key point about the early and the late stage rocker because those are generally what people are referring to when they're talking about rocker in running shoes, a shoe being too aggressive, a shoe feeling too flat, whatever it is they're talking about. So whether it's a super shoe, a performance trainer, or just a daily trainer or a standard trainer, you're always going to be running into those two types of things primarily. But as I said, there's a lot of other things that factor into this, and there's a lot of other nuances in this. As always, I encourage you to Google this stuff, or I'll put a link to Doctors of Running YouTube channel in the description because they're actually doctors and they're qualified to talk about the foot mechanics and how that interfaces with the shoes. And they have endless amounts of content that really get into the weeds of all of this stuff. I encourage you to check them out if you already don't watch them, if you're really into the actual details of all of these topics. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you want to support what I do here, check out sagasurunning.com for merch or click the join button below. If neither one of those options are good for you, leave a comment, leave a like. That helps this channel continue to grow, which I always appreciate. And with that, I'll catch you in the next one.